Hello and welcome to another episode of Podcasts of the Rings. My name is Jessica Lynn Verdi. I know not a lot about J.R.R. Tolkien, but I know what I know, and I know that I like it. And I'm joined today by Alexander Mitchell again.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Jess.
Hello. And he's our resident Tolkien expert. How do you feel about being on a podcast?
I think it's great.
Like having your own podcast?
Something I never thought would happen.
Why not?
I've been a fan of podcasts for a long time and been a listener of too many. So yeah, it's just nice getting to talk on one.
Yeah.
And having one and getting to share my passion for all of these things.
Yeah, so far I think we've changed lives.
I'd say so.
And have already helped people who didn't realize that there was more to know, or that they could care to know more about Lord of the Rings.
I think it's something you get a little bit of a taste of, and if you're inclined to that kind of thing, it awakens something in you. You go,
what is it?
What?
What's awakened in you, Alex?
Well, I've been awakened now for most of my life, but you get that little taste of like beyond the surface layer,
Sure.
of all of this stuff, and you go, I want to know more.
Sure. If you could be any, I would say character, but any race in Middle Earth or Tolkien's lore, what would it be?
Ooh, that is an interesting question. I mean, there's so many. I feel like I wouldn't want to be an elf because,
why not?
Well, so there's so much sorrow there. I mean, they get all of this, you know, the gift of super long lives, but then eventually, like, their bodies kind of just fade away and they become these spirit things, and there's a sadness there. I think that is you get to see in Lord of the Rings, to having the fate of the elves of living that long. I think maybe like a Numenorian, because you kind of get a little bit of both. You live for a long time. You're, stronger. You're like over 7 foot tall. They get kind of some of that beauty and splendor of the elves in terms of what they accomplished. But they are mortal. Mm-hmm. So at some point, there still is that the fate of men there. I think maybe a Numenorian. But then, as we'll see in the show, and if you read the Akalabeth and the Silmarils, they kind of mess up. They kind of mess things up with the gifts they were given. So,
Not everybody is a bad person in every race, right? You get not
no.
A whole, yeah. So maybe you're a good Numenorian.
Yeah. I'm one of the faithful.
I'd hope for your sake that were true.
I think so.
Yeah.
But then, I mean, then there's also like, I don't know, maybe like an Ent. That seems like a good life.
I actually sort of thought you would say Ent, or that like maybe actually when I asked what had been awakened in you, I feel like a respect for Ents or trees has been awakened in you. Some sort of maybe like an attraction. Do you have an attraction to trees? What would be like the sexual equivalent to furries but for trees?
I'm sure that's a thing. I don't know what the name for it is. I'm sure there are people out there who feel
I'm asking, like, what would you name it?
Well, if it's furries for animals,
right?
Leafies
or
furries,
branchies?
FIR?
Oh. I think that will be really confusing at the conventions. So.
That's my one allotted dad joke for the podcast.
You really spent that early too, so I hope you're feeling good about it.
It was just the perfect one, though.
It's a good one. I'm not gonna. You shouldn't feel badly.
I don't.
Good. That's
what about you?
Me?
If you had to pick one race of people to be,
I mean, I think I would say elf, just for the fact that I think if I did have that kind like, you know, everyone likes to say, like, "Ooh, what kind of blood do you think you have? Are you fae or, you know, or whatever?" Like, I would love to think I was an elf,
Hmm.
but right now, I think I'd like to be a dwarf.
Yeah.
I kind of just want to know how the other half lives. You know, what is it like to have beards like your husband? What is it like to just be short and stout and real? I don't love being underground, you know, and in pure darkness. So
That'd be a new
let's
experience.
experience some.
Well,
That's all I mean. Yeah.
two things. So number one, we did see the new trailer, and I have to say, Khazad Dûm looks pretty great. It doesn't look like you'd think an underground cave would look. There's lush greenery. It looks great. I'm excited to see more of that. And also,
Totally. Very Minecraft.
again, much to the chagrin of some online commenters, the dwarf women won't have beards in the show. So
They won't.
no.
That is actually unfortunate.
It would have been interesting to see. I think it would have taken away some of the gravitas they're going for. Because that's just a silly image, isn't it?
I kind of love the normalization of it aspect.
Fair.
That's all. Like, I know what you mean, but then that speaks even less highly of them, because there are women, or, you know,
Yeah.
females that have facial hair. So
Totally.
that's a failing of theirs if that's the reasoning.
I don't know what the reasoning is. I would imagine that probably played into it. And also,
It's a
there's not-
glamour. It's not. You can't have Game of the Thrones if it's. I who knows? Game of the Thrones. Did I just say Game of the Thrones?
There's multiple thrones. Game of
Game
the
of
Thrones.
the Thrones.
I'm glad they didn't do it though, because it is. I think people.
I can't believe you're an anti-facial hairist
Clearly, I'm not.
for females.
Oh no, that's fine. I'm not against that. I'm just the places in Tolkien's text where he does mention this are, if you look into a dubious at best to whether it or not it's true. There's one interpretation where it could be true. I think people sort of latched onto that idea because of and the Tolkien professor Corey Olsen talks about this, and I'm a big fan of his. If you are interested in this stuff, go check him out and his various shows and podcasts and everything. Corey Olsen.
Corey Olsen, everybody.
Corey Olsen. But he got in hot water for talking about this from these internet commenters.
What did he say?
He said that that like dwarven women don't have beards, and you can, like many things in Tolkien, depending on which text you look at and which writing you look at, and from what year it was and when it was written, you can come to two different conclusions about something in his world, because it was constantly evolving. He was changing things, and some things he never solidified in his mind.
I see.
So there is text that could support the idea that dwarf women have beards, but it's also written in worlds from the perspective of a non-dwarf who is hearing about these things. So that could just be like, people haven't seen dwarf women, and so these rumors in Middle-earth are circulating, oh, dwarf women look like the men, and that's why we haven't seen them.
But Aragorn does say you should see the women. And I imagine Aragorn has seen a dwarven woman.
And that's in the films. And so I think a lot of people are looking at the films, and they have that funny, amazing scene that I love where they talk about dwarf women, but that's not anywhere in the text. That's Peter Jackson extrapolating from
fair
ancillary texts that aren't Lord of the Rings, which are fine, but that's him making a decision about dwarf women in the world.
I see. Well,
because it's a funny moment. It's a funny moment.
It's delightful. Making fun again of people with facial hair. Just unbelievable. I'm gonna get other people in hot water for being judgmental about this. And you heard it here first, folks. We could continue to talk about dwarves, but that would not be in keeping with what we're actually here to talk about today.
Sure.
But you're right. Before we even do that, perhaps does behoove us to mention that the trailer has come out.
Yes.
So we did watch a little bit of it on my stream. You went deeper into it than we did. What's your takeaway? What are you thinking?
I mean, broad strokes, pardon me, it makes me excited for the show even more. We are seeing some things. We saw a little bit more of things in the first age flashbacks, which we're going to get. So we covered a lot of things that happen in the Years of the Trees and the First Age, which, according to various sources, we're going to get, I think, one episode. The first episode is going to be basically flashback of before the second age.
I
So we
kind of
saw
had
a
a
lot more
feeling
of
that
that.
that was going to be the case for sure.
And that's why I wanted to do that with our first episode. There are a lot of things that happen that will enhance your viewing and understanding of the events of the Second Age if you know about them. But that could be a whole other show or two in and of itself. So they're
Right.
kind of condensing things in one episode, broad strokes flashback. We see a lot of that.
And that doesn't preclude them from doing a whole series about it in the future, as we know, because some of the stuff that we're talking about now was briefly talked about in the first movie as well.
The prologue of Lord of the Rings is
what we're culminating to what this series is.
It will be the finale.
Right.
What we see
Is this a mini series, or are we going to get like season 2?
No, multiple seasons. Yeah.
Yes, multiple seasons?
Yeah.
So then we won't know when we culminate to this.
I don't know. I don't think they've announced how many seasons there are going to be, but there will be multiple seasons because,
Depends
as
on
I
how
said,
the reception is.
What's that?
I'm sure it depends on what the reception is as well.
Sure. I think it will be good, though, if I had to bet. But yeah, as I said, Sauron isn't even supposed to appear in this first season, so you need him.
That's fair. You did say that, and I just love not listening to you.
There's a lot to keep track of, a lot to remember.
So many things.
Yeah, and there will be even more things, but related to things we talked about last week. So I think last week was diving into the deep end of throwing all these things at you, and I'm sure many listeners, just all unfamiliar stuff for a lot of people. But some of the things we're going to be talking about today will relate back to that. So we set that groundwork for a basic level of understanding to build upon. And today we're going to be talking about a character that probably everybody knows, the most, I think, ubiquitous character in all of...
Anderson.
Exactly, Agent Smith, everyone's favorite. I invite you all to take the red pill.
Is that the right one? Is that the one you want to take?
That's the one that wakes you up.
Okay, great. Cool.
We're talking about Elrond, of course.
Mr. Anderson.
Mr. Anderson, as portrayed by Hugo Weaving in the films. But this is a character we get that appears in The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, the events of the Second Age. So he's all over the place, and he plays a big part in all of this stuff. So he's a very important character and has history related very closely related to Galadriel. Are you ready to just dive into this?
I think, Alexander, I've wanted nothing more than this.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go.
I did.
He said,
I did ask you about Galadriel when we talked about her last time. So obviously you got the Mr. Anderson, Hugo's portrayal. What's your impression of Elrond, just from someone who's read the book, who's seen the Lord of the Rings films? Have you seen? Because I know we didn't watch them together. Have you seen the Hobbit trilogy?
I have not. No.
Okay, because he's in that too. But what's your impression of Elrond?
I think he's super into himself. I think he's really thinks he's something special.
Mm-hmm.
I think he really thinks he's a man. He's an elf among elves,
Sure.
and I don't know. He's a man who likes luxury a little bit. I think.
Rivendell is a nice spot. I mean, it's pretty idyllic.
Yeah. It's nice, soft. He knows what's good in Middle Earth, and I think he tends to it. I think he's also giving. I think he's generous.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's no Jeffrey Bezos, but I think I definitely think he's aware of his superiority.
He knows his importance. Yes.
But do we even know what his importance is? Is he important? Or does he just think he's important?
Well, you're saying you think it's more of the latter.
What makes him important is my question.
I have answers.
Okay, let's go.
So let's start from the beginning. All right, like we did with Galadriel. So his lineage and parentage are very important. He is the son of Earendil and Elwing. So Elwing, Earendil comes from
Carrie Ewells. No, different character. No, Patrick Ewing. Patrick Ewing.
Patrick Ewing, descendant of Carrie Elwes or King Elwë. So you're right there.
Okay, wow.
These mnemonics are helping, which I'm grateful for. So Earendil, we're not going to get deep into that line because he is a man who, long story short, he's descended from all three of the houses of the Edain, which are men who helped the elves in the War of Wrath. That's all you need to know for now. But Elwing is the daughter of Beren and Luthien. Okay, two of the most important characters in the Tolkien myth.
So I do think it's interesting that you didn't lead with them last week. And that being said, I can understand why you didn't, because if Elrond is a direct descendant of them, then it would make sense to talk about them now. And it is,
yes.
Here's the thing. Here's why I want to talk about them the most, because it's the most stable ground for me to walk on with the lore, because it's romantic.
It's very romantic. It is on Tolkien and his wives' gravestones, Beren and Luthien. He really saw himself.
Stop.
Yeah, and his.
Well, so he thought he was a goddamn Elrond.
Well, no, he thought his wife was Luthien because he actually based the story.
Really?
He based the story of Beren and Luthien's meeting upon when he first saw his wife.
Do you think of me as Luthien?
I think so.
Oh, okay.
And so it's a very romantic story that is coming from direct experience of Tolkien's life.
Uh-huh.
So Beren and Luthien, I'll give a brief overview of like the key points of the Beren and Luthien story, because we could do a whole episode on Beren and Luthien.
I know. I want to.
Maybe we will. Bonus episode.
Okay.
Because it's not at all related to like the Second Age stuff. This is First Age stuff.
I like it now. I care about it even more than I thought I did.
Maybe we can do that as like when we set up the whole Patreon thing. That'll be a Patreon bonus episode.
I set up the whole Patreon thing? Actually, that's a great idea. I'm sorry, I'm just being an asshole. I'm sorry, I'm just being a jerk.
I could say some things.
What do you mean?
About the research I'm doing. Sure, you could set up Patreon. I'm doing all this research.
You're doing plenty of work. I know.
Yeah.
No, that's a great idea. I love that. Like adding some deeper dive topics. That's a great way to start.
Yeah, and Beren and Luthien would be a great place to start because it connects a lot of this stuff. A lot of the stuff that happens in the First Age with the Silmarils and everything. So, brief overview of Beren and Luthien. They meet. Beren is a man, and Luthien is the daughter of Carrie Elwes, King Thingol, and Melian, who we haven't talked about.
I've never heard Melian before. This is new to me.
Melian is a Maya. So
I don't even know what a Maya is.
Okay, so you know the wizards, right?
Mm-hmm.
Gandalf and Saruman and Radagast and the two blue wizards, they are Maya who were sent to Middle-earth. Basically, they're angelic beings. They're spirit-type beings. And in the case of the wizards, they were given physical form to go to Middle-earth. And Melian is also one who takes on physical form. And it introduces some interesting questions because she marries Thingol. And they get down, and they have children. So they're part.
Hey,
Maya?
Why can't they have fun too?
I'm just saying it raises interesting questions about the cosmology of Tolkien's world because this is the only example of this we have
of a celestial being to some extent.
Yeah, so it's like, could Gandalf have had kids? Like, I guess maybe, but Melian is special in that she's the only Maya ever to have kids.
Got it.
So Luthien is one of those kids. So she is an elf with a little bit of Maiar sprinkled in there, because Melian takes on the form of an elf as her physical form. So it's like, is she like half elf, half Maiar? I don't know. Anyway,
this is a lot.
It's a lot. So that's where Luthien comes in. She's the princess, the daughter of Thingol. Beren comes across her in the woods of Doriath, the woodland realm, and becomes enchanted with her. And long story short, there's many things that happen, but he goes to Thingol and asks for her hand in marriage, and Thingol says, no, unless you come to me with a Silmaril pried from the iron crown of Morgoth. And in doing so, he knows Beren's going to die. There's no way. Cruel. Right? So he's kind of like either, F off or go to your death. That's kind of, he thinks he's being really clever, right? You'll never marry my daughter. But he ends up getting help from Finrod, who is Galadriel's brother, and eventually Luthien herself. And many things happen. They like him and Finrod and some people get like captured by Sauron on his island of werewolves, and they have to fight them. This is
very Grecian.
Oh yeah, Tolkien draws in a lot of different kind of mythical elements. There's a lot of like Anglo-Saxon. There's a lot of Greek. There's a lot of it. It's kind of a hodgepodge of different influences, which I think is really cool.
Sure.
So they get captured by Sauron. They eventually get freed. Then they get captured by Morgoth, and Luthien Luthien and Beren go. And in the end, Luthien sort of enchants Morgoth with her song, while Beren pries a Silmaril from his crown. But he's a little hasty, and he goes, I was only supposed to get one. That was the deal, but I want all three. So tries to get more, ends up waking up Morgoth. They get chased down by, I'm trying to remember the wolf's name, Cockaroth or something. This werewolf, essentially. Beren has the Silmaril in his hand, which was part of the wording of like Thingol's thing. Is like, if you have a Silmaril in your hand, you can marry my daughter. But its hand gets bit off.
No.
Yeah, and is in the belly of this beast. Luthien nurses him back to health. They go and tell Thingol, and he allows him to marry Luthien. And then they go with Huan, who is this Hound of the Valar, who was loyal to two of the sons of Feanor, and was one of the reasons that they were able to escape from Sauron's captivity. They go and kill the beast, and then get the Silmaril back and present it to Thingol. But Beren dies in that process. Luthien is struck with grief and dies herself. They go to they're in basically she goes to Valinor, and this is where like part of the Aragorn Arwen thing is paralleled. She is stricken with such grief that they're separated, that she asks, can we be together? Because I can't bear to be apart from Beren. And so eventually they have counsel with the Valar, and Manwë consults with the one himself, Daddy, and Eru Ilúvatar, and is given permission, Manwë is, to basically allow Luthien a choice. She can either stay in Valinor, as an elf would when she dies, but be forever separated from Beren, or both her and Beren can be sent back, Beren basically being brought back to life, and they can go live in Middle-earth forever. Not forever, but they'll both be mortal. So she can give up her immortality. And that's what they end up doing.
Did you just destroy the purpose of having a deep dive?
No, because I glossed over so much.
Okay, great.
That's like the barest cliff notes of that whole story.
Amazing.
There's so much more. So, Thingol has a Silmaril now. This is important. So, Elwing's father, Elwing is Elrond's mother, the daughter of Beren and Luthien.
Okay.
So
how many kids do they have?
Beren and Luthien have 2 or 3 kids. I think Dior is one of them who's important for this part of the story. Beren and Luthien have Dior and Nimroth have, I think, 2 or 3 kids. So yeah, there's so much family trees to keep track of. But Dior is Elwing's father, the son of Beren and Luthien, and he basically is ruling over Doriath. His father died because of the Silmaril. The dwarves had created this necklace, the Noglamir. For Finrod. And Thingol ended up getting this necklace and wanted to set the Silmaril in it, basically taking one of the greatest craftsmanships of the dwarves and the elves and combining them.
Aha.
Right? The Silmaril in the Noglamir. And so he hired some dwarves to come and do this for him, and they were so enchanted by the sight of the Silmaril that they demanded it from him. They demanded the completed work from him, saying, like, look, this was built by the dwarves, and, you know, Finrod is dead, so technically this should come back to us, basically justifying a way to get a Silmaril. He denied them. They killed Thingol.
Oh my.
And fled. And this is one of the things that leads to kind of the strife between the elves and the dwarves. So it eventually makes its way back, and Luthien gets it. And because Thingol dies, Dior is ruling his kingdom of Doriath. One day, a messenger comes and gives him the Noglamir with the Silmarils set in it. Basically, he knows, like, Luthien and Beren have died because he's getting this from them. So he has this thing. And guess who hears about it? Guess who hears about the fact that this has returned?
Elwing.
Who cares about the Silmarils? Do you remember this?
Oh, hold on. Not Morgoth. Morgoth was the one who had them in his crown. The weird uncle.
Yes. Yeah, the weird uncle.
The weird uncle.
And his sons. Feanor and his sons. They swore that oath. The oath of the Silmarils. So I can't remember which son it is who hears about it. I think Maglor hears about it. Maglor's one of his sons. So they hear, oh, the Silmaril's back in town? Time to fulfill our oath. So they
Which
go.
was to not deal with them at all, right? Or
no, their oath was, whoever shall hold a Silmaril shall suffer our wrath, and we'll get him back.
Oh, I understand.
Even if it's another elf.
I misunderstood. Now we're here.
Yeah.
Got it.
That's why this leads to all this strife. So Feanor's sons reunite, they rally together, and they sack Doriath. They kill Dior, his wife Nimroth, and his Dior's sons. I think he has 2 sons. They're left to basically die, and their fate's unknown. But Elwing manages to escape with the Noglamir and the Silmaril in it. Okay, and so this was basically the second kinslaying. The first one being when Feanor originally...
Oh, that's right, and it had never happened before. Yep.
Yeah, and so this is the second time. Second time elf kills another elf. So Elwing, Elrond's mom, escapes. She escapes to the havens of Sirion, and by this point, she has, with Earendil, a man, so this is another union of a man and an elf, has 2 sons, 2 twins, Elros and Elrond.
Or a pair of twins. Twins, not two.
Yes,
twins.
yes. A set of twins.
Great.
So the sons of Feanor cannot be stopped. They hear that she's gone to the havens of Sirion and go there to, finish what they started. So Elwing is not willing to give up the Silmaril to them, and so she, with it, casts herself into the sea. But this is where it gets interesting. So
why?
Because it's dramatic.
Drama.
She doesn't want the Silmaril to go into their hands, right? And Olmo, one of the Valar of the Sea, he's kind of the more seclusive, brooding type. He just kind of, they got to summon him all the time. He doesn't really hang out like in Valinor a lot. But he decides, you know what? I'm going to turn you into a bird.
Okay.
So Elwing gets turned into a bird. Now, at this same time, her husband, Elrond's dad, Earendil, is on the sea. He's looking, we won't get into why, he's looking for his parents, Tuor and Idril. They're another union of man and elf. So he has half-elven blood in him as well. And he's looking for them because they had sailed long ago. So Elwing, in bird form, finds him. And she flies onto his ship and tells him about all this stuff that had happened. And he's like, man, it's getting pretty bad in Middle-earth. So we're going to actually change course. He was heading back to Middle-earth at the time because he had sort of been like, all right, our mission's done. We can't find him. They start sailing to Valinor, which is a big deal because only elves are allowed there. But they're not technically elves. They're not full elves, right?
Okay.
So they have the Silmaril, and the magic of the Silmaril allows them to complete this journey. And upon hearing all this, the Valar basically say, you know what? This is a noble cause. We're going to come and help you in the fight against Morgoth. And clearly there's some stuff going on. You're killing each other? What is this? Like, you need help. And you're already kind of getting your asses kicked by Morgoth. But this is where it becomes important for Elrond. Because it's a big deal about, like, what do we do? You and Elwing, Earendil and Elwing broke the rules. They're part mortal, and they sort of set foot on land intended only for elves. But they had it in their hearts that they were wanting to do the right thing for both elves and men. So they give both Earendil and Elwing a choice, similar to the choice they gave to Luthien, but a slight difference. Because, you know, they hadn't died, right? They're still alive. They had just sailed to Valinor. It wasn't their spirits that had been sent there.
Sail away, sail away,
come sail away, come sail away. So they give them the choice. Do you want, because they both have elf and mortal blood, do you want to be counted among the Eldar, or do you want to be counted among the men? And they extended that same choice to their sons, Elros and Elrond. Now, Earendil would have chosen the fate of man, but Elwing chose the fate of the elves, and he wanted to be with her, so he chose the fate of the elves. We'll get back to what Elros and Elrond choose. But while all that is happening, Elros and Elrond are kind of like, their mom just threw herself in the ocean. They get taken in by one of Feanor's sons, Maglor. And he becomes kind of their foster dad. He raises them because he feels badly. And so, you know, tenuous bond between them, but he raises them as his own. And there's all sorts of other stuff that happens with Earendil and Elwing, but they fight in the War of Wrath. Earendil literally fights a dragon on a flying ship, which is pretty cool. The Valar like put the Silmaril in his ship and give it the ability to fly, and with the eagles he like fights and kills Thangorodrim, a dragon.
Thangorodrim? Thangorodrim?
Yes.
I like it.
He's on a flying ship
name
and
my dog
kills it.
Thangorodrim.
It's a good dog name. Thangorodrim.
Thangorodrim, come here.
Hey,
I will kill you on a ship.
Stop it. Don't make me come over there, Thangorodrim. Down. Put it down. Put it down.
Okay, great. Perfect. I'm glad we're agreed.
So they get raised by Maglor, but they have this choice before them. Elrond chooses the fate of the elves, and Elros, his twin brother, chooses the fate of men. So Elros basically goes on to become the first king of Numenor. And that's where you get this strain of elven blood in the Numenorians. But the Numenorians also are just gifted like long life and all this other things because they were the Edain, which were the men who ended up fighting with the elves. So like the Valar give them this gift mystically and magically, but also there's this strain of elf blood, so that like combines. So there's kind of like Numenorians that are royalty that have a little bit more magic because of elf blood, and then there's just the regular Numenorians who just have magic because they were gifted it.
Gotcha.
But that's okay. Elros. We're not talking about him yet.
Forget that guy.
Until we start talking about Isildur and Elendil and all of that. So table that. Remember him. He'll come back. Elrond chooses the fate of the elves. But his children, because he chose elven fate, like they then get to, if they want to, go back on that and choose the fate of man again.
Right.
Which is all the stuff with Arwen that we get in Lord of the Rings. That's where all of that comes from. So he, after the War of Wrath, where all of Beleriand sinks, he ends up with a lot of other elves going back to Lindon, which is the kingdom ruled over by Gil-galad, the last king of High King of the Noldor. And he becomes kind of renowned as a healer and a lore master in Lindon. So he kind of distinguishes himself among the other people. And remember, he's like of royal blood too. Mm-hmm. He's descendant, if you trace his lineage back, he's descendant all the way from Cary Elwes. So,
I mean, that's as royal as it gets.
Yes,
as you wish.
But it's through
royal,
it's through the mother's side. It's through a female line, so he doesn't have like a claim to the throne. Mm-hmm. Whereas Gil-galad does, so that's why he's not like royalty per se. But so he's hanging out in Lindon with Gil-galad, and this is all in the Second Age because this is after the War of Wrath. So this is stuff we'll see probably. This is going to be concurrent stuff that's happening in the show, cool, or changes to the show. In the year 1000 of the Second Age, this is when we get Anatar showing up, which again, we're probably not going to see in the first season.
So you think that still after watching the trailer?
I don't think we're not going to see what happens here. I think we're going to see Anatar, but I don't think we're going to get him. What happens here is he basically goes around to all of the different places seeking an audience and trying to, appeal
good old
to them.
Soapboxing or...
Yeah. And he sort of claims to be like a Maiar sent from Valinor or whatever. And we'll see if they end up going that route in the show. But one of the places he goes...
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, because this is, remember, before the wizards, which that actually was what happened. The wizards were Maiar sent by the Valar to
right,
Middle-earth.
But he was saying that. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. So he goes to Lindon, ruled over by Gil-galad, and Elrond is there. But they both are like, something seems fishy here. We don't like this. So they deny him an audience, essentially. But he ends up going to Eregion, and all of that bad stuff happens there, which we'll get into more with his episode and Celebrimbor's episode. War ends up breaking out between Sauron when he finally reveals himself and the elves, particularly the elves in Eregion, which is where Celebrimbor and Galadriel and Celeborn are at the time. Mm-hmm. And so in 1695, a few years after that war starts, so this is like 600 years of Anatar kind of going around and then eventually settling in Eregion and helping with the ring making and all of that. Gil-galad sends Elrond with sort of a battalion of Noldor elves to help fight against Sauron and his forces. But in the end, it doesn't help. Eregion is pretty much overrun. And so Elrond takes some of the surviving Noldor elves and goes a little bit north and founds Imladris,
And Ladris.
a.k.a. Rivendell. So this is the origin of Rivendell.
Oh.
Basically a bunch of refugees and not exiles, but people fleeing this war. They go and they found the hidden city of Rivendell, the hidden fortress of Rivendell. And Elrond's basically leading them.
So he's kind of important.
He's very important, yes. And spoilers, Celebrimbor dies, so that's kind of why he's not ruling them, because in lack of him as a leader, they go, okay, who's like the next wisest and most powerful person and someone of notable lineage? Elrond. Like, yeah, your great granddad, I think, is how it works out, was like, one of the OG kings of the elves.
Kind of.
Great granddad.
Why Aragorn gets like just lineage.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, yeah, he's the last remaining member of that royal line. Yeah. Yeah, blood is important for this kind of thing. So they go and found Rivendell, but eventually Sauron's forces make their way north, and it becomes besieged. But they hold out. It's not captured. They're just under siege for a long time. Then Gil-galad comes to their aid with a group of Númenóreans. I can't remember the king at the time, but he's been working with the Númenóreans this whole time to greater and lesser extents. But they get some Númenóreans and they help break the siege and defeat Sauron's forces. And after that, they kind of get together for a little powwow, and Gil-galad's like, you know what, Elrond, you did a good job. Let's keep you as the leader of Rivendell in Imladris, and this will be our new kind of base in Eriador in the east, because Eregion had fallen. And you know what? I'm going to appoint you officially. Like, you're not just kind of my advisor and a cool guy and a counted among the wise now, but you're going to be the vice regent. So he's kind of like his VP.
Interesting.
But ruling in the east, whereas Gil-galad is ruling all the way in the west, where the Grey Havens are, on the coast. So they kind of have these two seats of power essentially in the remaining Noldor strongholds. And this is also when Elrond is gifted by Gil-galad with Gil-galad, sorry. Elrond is gifted the Ring of Vilya, which is one of the 3 elven rings of power, which Gil-galad had been given by Celebrimbor. So this is when he gets his ring, and it's used by him to sort of keep Rivendell hidden and maybe enhances some of his like foresight abilities, which he has. So he's, very knowledgeable in healing and lore, but also has the gift of foresight. And so that ring kind of enhances those abilities a little bit.
Interesting.
And then finally, the thing we see in the prologue in the Peter Jackson films, he does fight in the War of the Last Alliance with Gil-galad, with Elendil, Isildur, Anarion, Círdan, another elf we probably are not going to talk about, and I don't think is going to be in the show, even though he's there. So he's at the Battle of Dagorlad, which is that final battle we see in the prologue and the films. And along with Círdan, when Isildur finally does Sauron in, Elrond is right there, the wise man he is, with the little bit of foresight he has. He's like, hey, Isildur, should we destroy this ring now? And Isildur does not do that, as we all know, leading to the events in the books. But I will say one of the things I don't like in the film adaptation, they kind of present it as like Isildur, he sort of menacing is like, no, like he's evil,
right.
But he does have justification for it. We see in the Of the Rings of Power in the Third Age section of the Silmarillion, he has a justification like, my brother died, my father died, I'm claiming this. He calls it a weregild, which I think is an old English term or something. Basically, debt paid to me for the death of my kin in battle.
Which is like, calm down, bro. Like,
but that would be a concept.
But he knows he knows it's a bad thing.
Well, they don't know. We as the readers have the benefit of understanding what the One Ring is. And at the time, as wise as Elrond and Círdan are, they go, okay, maybe this isn't like the best thing, but they don't foresee, thousands of years into the future where, oh crap, Sauron can regain his strength this readily. And if he gets this ring again, like they think Sauron's been defeated.
I see. That's fair.
Just like, at the beginning of the Second Age, when it's like, oh, Morgoth's defeated, whatever. But then evil slowly, works its way back into the world. So there's no way they could have foreseen that. And maybe they thought, Isildur's a little foolish, but we'll let him have this. His brother and father just died,
Right. We feel so sad for this guy. Yeah, I hear you.
And it's not like he's just evil. No, it's mine. And, like they kind of portray in the films. He's like, no, right. You know what? I have a valid claim on this that's established in our laws as a thing. And they go, okay, we can respect that. Even if we don't agree with it, it doesn't seem evil. But that's the true evil of the ring, is that it leads you to those justifications and you can, lie to yourself and others easily.
That's interesting.
So that's the true insidiousness of the ring. But that's the end of the Third Age, or excuse me, the end of the Second Age. And then, so we see him in The Hobbit, helping Thorin and company, and Bilbo. And he is, we're not going to talk too much about Third Age stuff, because that's, especially with Elrond, whole can of worms, and doesn't apply to the show, really. And right. So that's a whole other thing. And then obviously he plays a very important role in The Lord of the Rings.
Very important.
Yeah.
And he's Arwen's dad. Yeah. So, okay. All right. So essentially, if we don't have Elrond, where are we left?
Are you saying, like, if he hadn't been there?
Yeah, like what? Elrond is important just because he was there? Or, like, was he really making strategic decisions? Or...
Well, yeah, he led the remaining... The main things he does in the Second Age that are in the text, he saves a bunch of Noldor people and gives them refuge in Rivendell. Had he not been around to lead them, they probably just would have been wiped out.
Right. Fair.
By Sauron. Or, that not as many would have escaped and they would have been scattered, and you wouldn't have had that base of operations in Rivendell for them to sort of gather strength in that region and then later strike back at the various battles in that war, and then finally the War of the Last Alliance. And he was trusted enough by Gil-galad to be given Vilya, which, if you think about it, it's like, man, who else would have been given that ring?
Mm-hmm.
That would have, like, I'm trying to think of people in the Second Age. I mean, Celebrimbor's dead. Spoilers.
Oh no!
Look, the book's been out for almost, 80, 60 years now.
I can't believe you.
Yeah, so
where does he fall on your respect totem? Like, what do you think about him?
Well, I think he is probably, one of the wisest elves. With his powers of foresight helping him. He really has a good track record. Some of these other elves in the Second Age, they did some shady stuff, some bad decisions. Elrond, he's just wise all the time. Like, and that's why I'm interested to see. I think in the show, they're gonna give us maybe how he gets to that point, because again, there's huge chunks of time missing in the text. But you have 600 years of nothing from Elrond between when Anatar comes to seek an audience and when Elrond goes to fight against Sauron. And, a whole 1,000 years at the beginning of the Second Age. So I think they're going to fill that in with, how does Elrond get to the point where he is this person that is so trusted? And I think that's going to be interesting, seeing maybe an Elrond who's a little less wise, a little more hasty maybe. We see in that trailer the conflict between him and Galadriel.
Right. Well, because we also live in a world where women have to be right and men have to be the dumb ones. So,
What
we
did
have
that
to.
mean?
What?
What do you mean by that?
Just because it's the women's revolution, so you can't have. She needs to be like, I know things you don't know. Strong, badass woman.
Have you been reading those comments again?
I definitely understand the position of these men who are talking about woke Lord of the Rings, and if you can't get that I'm being sarcastic, then this is not the podcast for you. But I am saying there is some political agenda, to be fair. So there's.
I will also say I was rereading Unfinished Tales today, in doing some research for this, and there is a section.
You get it. You did work. You got it.
Not trying to flex, but I'll take it. No, there's a chapter in there on Galadriel and Celeborn, it's called, and it's this basically summary by Christopher of these different texts from Tolkien. And one of the things he says in there is that when Sauron sort of comes back, he fears Galadriel the most out of anybody when she's in.
Whoa!
When she's.
I'm not saying she's not a badass. I'm just saying we're watching Elrond be wrong. And I wonder how much that is an agenda aspect. Sure. I'm not saying she isn't a badass.
Yeah, and I wasn't putting those words in your mouth. I was just more circling back to the people who are saying those kinds of things. And just another example in the text I happened to find today.
I hear you.
Where it says, the elf or the person in Middle-earth Sauron feared the most is Galadriel.
Right,
so,
right.
There's got to be a reason for that. Not just because she's cool. She's pretty strong. And she was, sensing these forces of evil stirring, and Elrond is wrong about it. But we know he's one of the more wise people, so it'll be interesting to see that journey that they take him on, and I'm sure in part due to him interacting with Galadriel, which is very cool.
Ooh, they're gonna F, aren't they? They're related. I'm just kidding.
Okay. Yeah, she's his.
Mother-in-law?
No, hold on.
I've seen that video.
She is Arwen's grandmother, because Galadriel I think is, I'd have to bust out the family tree, but I think she's his mother-in-law.
Yeah, so I've seen that video exists. We all know that tale as old as time.
Yeah. But everyone's pretty closely related in all of these works. So
it's not a really big deal, is my point.
Again, in research of doing this, all the stuff we didn't talk about on the dad's side of Earendil, Tuor, and Idril, there is a part in the text when there's an elf, I think Orodreth? No, Maglin, I think, who wants to marry Idril, but they're first cousins, and Tolkien specifically points out, and elves don't marry first cousins. But beyond first cousins, I guess is kind of okay. But that's where they're no, first cousins, no.
We draw the line.
Second cousins, you're good.
Hey, everyone has to have a principle. So I'm glad we found the level where the principle is.
And it's a different culture. They have their own customs.
I'm just really glad that you and I are not cousins.
Yeah, that would be weird.
It would be weird. I'm just glad we just don't have to even deal with that, Yeah. So what? So I think he's less pompous now. I think he thinks he knows what he offers.
Well, and I will say, the film versions, the Peter Jackson film versions of Elrond are very cold and pompous and kind of haughty.
It's hard not to be Hugo Weaving, or it's hard to be Hugo Weaving and not do that also. So
yeah, he brings that to the character with his performance, but he's not described like that in the books when we see him. I think the phrase is he's kind as Christmas in the OG Hobbit. Which I think they later edited out because
Christmas shouldn't exist.
Yeah, I think in subsequent editions that was changed. But he's a very kind, open, wise individual, and I don't think Hugo Weaving portrays him like that. So we get this whole generation of people, and it's fine because I grew up on the movies too, but that's like kind of what you think of with Elrond.
Sure.
And he's not really described like that when
Right.
we see him in Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit.
And as we said, I'm a far distance time-wise away from having read the books myself, so I look forward to doing that soon.
Mm-hmm.
And drawing my own conclusions away from the movies as well.
Yeah, and I still, even when I reread, like I picture the actors from the movies in my head. It's
I'm
hard
not saying
to.
I know who my Mr. Darcy is and why, so I get it. Yeah. It's important. It's helpful.
Yeah. But the characterizations are much different, especially not to get on too much of a tangent, but especially Gimli. Gimli in the films is used as like just comic relief.
Mm-hmm.
Not at all like that. He's a much deeper character in the books. But again, it makes sense why they did that for a film adaptation. You got to have somebody fill that role.
Correct.
And it's great. I love what they do with him in the films, but it's just very different. So similarly with Elrond and everything with, Arwen's hand in marriage. I did want to briefly touch on this in the Third Age. Everything with Aragorn sort of being able to marry Arwen. They play up the drama of that in the movies. And in the book, it's really just Elrond going, when you fulfill your destiny, Aragorn, when you fulfill that and you have the seat of the king, you can marry my daughter. And Elrond fully believing that he can accomplish that and believing in him. Unlike his ancestor, Thingol, who sent Beren on that quest, you can have Luthien's hand in marriage when you get a Silmaril. Thingol was more like, I'm sending you to your death, Beren. Sure. And Elrond is more like, no, I believe in you, Aragorn. But you got to fulfill your destiny.
Yeah, that's kind of sweet, actually.
Yeah, and in the movie, it's just, he's going to fail, you're going to die, and he's going to die, and he's very grim and dark about it.
And then he's crying at the end, I was wrong.
Yeah, exactly. So it's much different. But again, adaptations, you got to do that to play up the drama of will they, won't they.
Correct. Yeah. Otherwise, I'm not watching, Well, I think I have a better grasp on Elrond. I appreciate that. And I'm looking forward to who we're going to learn about next week. Why don't you tell us what comedic relief we're going to learn about next week?
Well, I figured we've covered a lot of the elves. We've covered the history of the elves and Galadriel. We've now covered Elrond, learning a little bit more about the elves' history through him. So we're going to switch it up and get a different side of the story next week. And we're going to talk about Durin and the dwarves.
I'm so excited.
Durin the fourth specifically, because I believe we'll see Durin the third and the fourth in the show, but we'll talk about Durin the fourth, and probably the third in the process, but also just the general history of the dwarves, because it's very fascinating. It's not what you expect, and it's very different than the elves. So.
Alex, I want to acknowledge all the work you've done, and thank you for all the work you've done. It's not gone unappreciated. It's just that I won't ever do it. So,
well, that's why we're doing this show.
Correct. We're doing it for you, folks. All right. Well, what was our sign off, Alex?
Until next week, may our roads meet again.
Bye.
Goodbye.